want to give a great shout out to my friend who introduced us. I just want to thank so much Tracy Fiore for taking the time to say, you need to check out what's happening. They're getting ready for their millionth download for the lucky few. And so, for the full audience that is here, I'm super excited that you are here and just this beautiful, warm welcome. This conversation today is one of many conversations about inclusion, about how can we take who we are with all of the gifts that we have and be able to share those, but allow other people in the process to be able to share their gifts as well. I'm super excited to bring into the show Heather Avis of The Lucky Few. And Heather, it is just a delight to be here. You are a New York Times bestseller. You guys are here at this beautiful threshold of the millionth download for your show. I would love to hear the story of how you got to where you are today, friend.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me, first of all. What an honor. I'm so grateful that our paths have crossed as well. Yeah, how I got to be where I am is the question. So I will be concise and to the point, but it is a bit of a story. So when I got married very young, we're gonna go all the way back there, and always knew I wanted to be a mom. And then my husband and I decided to start to have kids a few years into our marriage, that we wanted to have children. And I ran into infertility. And after a couple of years of trying to figure out why I couldn't get pregnant naturally, realizing that it most likely would never happen. Um, and it was my OBGYN said it's like a mysterious, undiagnosed thing. It's not like this is why, this is why, this is why. It just the way that what they were discovering and everything that we found out, every test result led to another wall, to another wall, to another wall, until they said your only option for um, trying to get pregnant is in vitro fertilization, IVF, but that might not work. And so at that moment, we were at a crossroads of
Mhm.
that, of what we're going to do to grow our family, and felt a tug towards adoption. And we went down that path instead. That was the path that my husband and I chose. And hoping for a healthy infant, we went with a private agency. This was about 16, 17 years ago. Um, didn't know anyone who had adopted, nobody, not one person. And
Wow.
so didn't know where to start, and just kind of were in the LA area. Um, a coworker of mine got word of us wanting to adopt, and she said, "My son and his wife have adopted. Talk to them." And so they were our first connection to meeting a family with adoptive kids.
Yes.
And ended up going just with the agency they had used here in Southern California, where I live. And so we said we really wanted a healthy infant. When you do an adoption plan, it's a wild event where
Right.
you create, they give you a checklist, and it's about 6 pages long or more of everything that or it's like yes, no, maybe,
Right.
things you would consider in the child your potential child you would like to adopt, and birth family history. So we basically want a healthy infant. Fast forward, we've been awaiting family for about a year and feeling pretty antsy to get a placement. And we find out through a passing conversation with our social worker that there had been 2 babies with Down syndrome placed in the agency, which is very rare because most private agencies won't take kids with like known disabilities like Down syndrome.
Right.
And I'm sorry, there are private agencies that are specific to disability adoption or Down syndrome, but most other private agencies
Right.
their clients are looking for healthy infants. So we find this out, and I can't unlearn it.
Right.
There's like a spark in my heart towards this baby with Down syndrome, and I'm not happy about it. I wish that I didn't know that information. I wish I could just say that's nice and move on with my life. And I couldn't shake it.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I, through a series of conversations that felt like a lifetime, but it really is just a couple weeks in the adoption world.
Yes.
It's very quick. We decided that we wanted to learn more about this baby. And in the meantime, thinking like, this is not the plan. I was never going to have a child with a disability or a child with Down syndrome. I don't want this, but
Mhm.
I can't walk away from it. It was a very interesting tension in my heart and soul.
Yes.
And so we learn more about this baby girl. We find out that she, yes, has Down syndrome, but she also has a stack or a list of
Yeah.
complex health issues. She would need open heart surgery at best. She was on oxygen 24/7, had a
Mm,
condition that was very severe that most likely would not resolve itself.
mm.
Um, and on multiple medications. And so then it's like, wait a second, now we're talking about adopting a sick baby, like a medically
Right.
fragile baby, right?
Right. Yes.
So again, we want to walk away. It's reasonable to walk away, and we just couldn't. We just
Yes.
couldn't. And no one in our life is pressuring us to pursue this baby. It's quite the opposite,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like it's people saying, "What are you doing? Like why
Yes.
what you don't have to do this. Like are you thinking clearly? I'm concerned for the
Mhm.
choices you're making."
And you were also an elementary special ed teacher, so it wasn't that you were unknowing, right? I mean, you were working with students who had IEPs, who had 504 plans, who had, this list of things that we as teachers know that we have to help in the classroom fulfill these educational requirements. So this wasn't this could be kind of a
Right.
fun thing. You came in with your eyes open.
Yes, I did, and I taught high school, actually, not
Okay,
elementary school, but
thank you.
yes, and I had students with Down syndrome who I adored. I
Yes,
adored them.
yes,
However, as a new parent, I was 27 years old, and I my story was a story of healthy children, right? Just like every mother I had ever met with a child with Down syndrome, their story was not to parent a child with Down syndrome.
right.
And so it was an interesting, not a battle in my mind, no, that might be the right word,
Mm,
of I love my students with Down syndrome wholly and genuinely, and I love people with Down syndrome, and I don't want a child with Down syndrome. It seems contradictory, but so we end up adopting this baby girl. There's a lot more
mm,
there, but she comes home, and very shortly after coming home, I mean, I remember the day she came home, and we pick her up at the adoption agency. It's about an hour from our house. We drive home,
mm.
and because she was so medically fragile, we were very strict on who could be around her.
Right,
Her pulmonologist, who's a doctor who works with lungs, had said if she gets a cold, it could turn into pneumonia
right,
and she will die. Like her body and her heart are not strong enough to fight off a common cold, essentially.
right.
And this was October, the end of October. And so we had limited that. So we get home, it's just my husband and I, and then we let our parents come and my sister,
Yes,
and wash your hands, shoes off. Like, do you
right,
have a sniffle? You are not welcome.
right.
And I remember walking upstairs that night with her, and my family had all left. And by the time I get to the top of the stairs, she's asleep on my shoulder, right? It had been a busy day. And I sit down in this nursery, this room that I had walked past
Mhm.
for years, wanting to put a
Yes,
baby in.
yes,
And I sit in the rocking chair and I hold her in my hands and I look at her little sleeping face and I just think, "Oh, I can't remember what I was so afraid of." Like she was just this living, breathing baby human in my
yes,
arms. So that was
yes,
a moment when she first came home, that very first day of, wow, I get to be her mom.
yes.
So, like I said, it's a long story, but fast forward with me, if you will. She's a little bit older, and I'm realizing that there was a story about Down syndrome
Mhm.
that almost kept us from adopting her. It's the
Right.
story that her birth family was told and why they didn't parent her. If
Mm,
she did not have Down syndrome, they would have parented her. Why they chose an adoption plan. And it is a story that tells us Down syndrome is bad.
mm,
This is a devastating diagnosis. This is a person with Down syndrome does not deserve to live, or a person with Down syndrome does not deserve the same access and opportunities as people without Down syndrome. This is the narrative being whispered in my ear or blatantly said out loud.
wow.
And then she's home and I don't feel any of that. And I'm meeting a bunch of people in the community who it's the same story. They were terrified and devastated about
Mm,
their child's diagnosis. And then I call it to the other side of things.
yes.
Which is maybe it's a day like it was for me, maybe it's weeks, months, years, but they get there and think, I can't remember what I was so afraid of. I'm so lucky
Mm,
to get to have a
yes.
child with Down syndrome and be in this community. And so that's where the lucky few really started to come from, is I was living it.
Mhm.
Um, and I just started saying the phrase the lucky few in blog posts on social media. And it just resonated with the community,
Yes.
with the Down syndrome community. And it took off almost as wildfire, this
Mm,
idea of being a part of the lucky few. Few of us love someone with Down syndrome. Those of us who do are very lucky. And
Yes.
also this idea of luck being attached to a
Mhm.
person with Down syndrome in a way that it's been my goal to shift the Down syndrome narrative
Yes.
and to say Down syndrome has never been bad. It never
Right.
will be bad.
Right.
We are dealing with a narrative that is false and harmful. And we're
Yes.
so lucky to love a person with Down syndrome.
Yeah. The one thing that in my lifetime that I have heard over and over again, different people who have either been through family attached to somebody with Down syndrome or knowing somebody else, that they are angels, that they just have this ability to see things through eyes that
Mhm.
are pure. And how amazing that that is. That just really cuts out so much of the conversation, right?
Right.
That the fluff that so many of us talk about or spend time thinking about or whatever. And the picture behind you,
Mm,
um, that's Mace in the middle, right? And she
right.
was your first.
Yes, my first Macy right there in the middle. Whoop, whoop.
Yes.
Yes, she's 15 in this picture. And then her
Mm,
younger sister, who's the taller than her truly, who
yes.
has no disabilities, who came to us through adoption as well. And
Beautiful.
then my son, August, this
Yes.
dragon, he is 10 and he also has Down syndrome and came
Mm.
to us through adoption as well.
So it was really important for you to keep the birth order, but it wasn't so important for you to necessarily fill out the paperwork the same when you went through the adoption through the second time, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So after our oldest daughter Macy came home, and I had tried so hard to maintain control over my how my family was going to grow. There was a
Mm.
process for me in my infertility of recognizing that I really needed control in my life. I would say
Yes.
I'm a recovering control freak, and my infertility, I couldn't do anything. I tried everything, and it
Yes.
was completely outside of my control.
Yes.
And then that led me to this baby
Mhm.
where I tried to control, like all that control I had learned to kind of let go of, this opportunity of
Yes.
growth for me. It
Yes.
was so easy for me to quickly go back to,
Mhm.
oh, I need control here too.
Right.
And trying to get this child who I wanted in my mind. And I had to let go of all that control. And so by then I was starting to learn. And by the time we were adopting my daughter Truly, we went just totally opposite. We went with the county, which is like through the foster care system, which is very different process than the private adoption agency. And we were, like you said, we were pretty wide open to any child that we would get. We were hoping to keep birth order, so a child under 3. But
Right.
if we got a sibling set or if a child was older, our hands were wide open to whoever would find us. And we get this phone call from our social worker
Mm.
about a baby girl. She said a baby girl is who is Hispanic and at 6 months old was ready for adoptive placement. Do we want her? And it was our first call. And so, yes,
Yes.
whoever came to us was who we were going to say yes to. Yeah.
Yes. Incredible. And then Augie, how much younger was, how much later then did Augie come into the family?
hmm Um, so August came in to the family. Macy was 5
Mhm.
and Truly was 2.5.
Mm.
And it was a season of life for any mothers out there that I call in it. And I was a
Yes.
stay-at-home mom. And I would blog and I wrote a little bit, but only for fun.
Hmm.
And I was in it and I had a daughter with a disability and we were doing physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, early
Yes.
start teachers, all the things. And then I had my middle daughter was a lot of energy, like more energy than most kids her age.
Right.
And as they would say, a handful. And I was at my capacity, I thought.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
but we knew our family wasn't done. My husband and I were like, we're not done, so we decide that we want to grow our family again, but at that moment in time, knowing that maybe a year later I'd feel less capacity, like less like I
Right.
was going to rip in half.
Yes.
Um, and so we started the process with the county again, same county adoption, same with our middle daughter, True. And that day we like did the paperwork real quick. We were a returning family, so it was quick. and we brought the kids with us knowing it would be a fast thing. Took a little
Right.
picture of our family with our little, like, certificate,
Yes.
and said, "Hey,
Yes.
Avis family, like, Avis child number 3 coming at you next year," or however.
Yes. Right.
Right? And then, the next day, less than 24 hours later, my friend calls and she says, "Heather, I saw your picture you shared on Facebook
Mm.
about wanting to adopt again. I just today heard from a birth mother who has a in utero diagnosis of Down syndrome and a heart condition,
Mm.
and she would like to create an adoption plan, and he's due in 2 months." And
Wow.
I thought, "I don't need a baby in 2 months. I would like a baby next year."
Right. Yes.
And I didn't know that I was really did want another child with Down syndrome. Like,
Mhm.
that was
Right.
a factor to that was something to really have to factor in to our decision making, and
Yes.
what does that mean for our daughter without a disability sandwiched
Right.
between 2 kids with Down
Between.
syndrome, and how do we do a heart surgery with 2 little girls at home? When Macy came home, she was an only child and
Right.
all that. But we talked to his birth mom that day and then met her the next week, and
Mm.
then he was born 2 months later, and we were at the hospital shortly after, and we brought him home 3
Mm.
days later, and he's been just an absolute pleasure from the second he entered our lives.
Exactly. He is just life and laughter happening all the time.
He
We're gonna
is.
take a super fast break here, but when we come back, I wanna hear more about this process of you guys growing your family and making those decisions to do that and being so methodical in your process of conversation and concern for the girls that you have and what's the next step gonna be. So we'll be right back. Field Trip is one of my favorite places to shop, and I also really appreciate that Grace Sanchez is choosing us. Simply Sarah is one of the places, the outlets that she is choosing to advertise on. Just super grateful for that. In our conversation with Heather, she's been sharing this part about infertility, and when we had our pre-conversation, it just really hit my heart because that was something that Michael and I had gone through and had just given up and just said, whatever's supposed to be is going to be. And I love in this process of Heather sharing her story that there became for them this calling on their heart to choose adoption. And in my extended family, there is a number of children who are adopted. And so I love this process of her sharing how they've gone through private agency, but they've also gone through county. They've also heard people sharing. And the way that the children come to us is such an amazing story. And so, as we're continuing this conversation with Heather, I would love, Heather, for you to share a bit more about that process of you guys deciding it was time to grow your family anew.
Yes. So the thing about life and being a human is we have an opportunity to learn and grow along the way, right? Every year, every day. And in that learning and growing, for me, there's been a lot of getting it wrong and having to adjust. And adoption was a big one for me for that. So by the time we were adopting our son August, I had just a different understanding, or I had grown in my understanding around adoption, in that
Mm.
it's not just me getting my baby, and how harmful that mindset is, and that idea of, like, I'm a hero, I've done this wonderful thing, these poor children,
Mm.
I get to bring them home and I will be their mother, there's no threat in that, and we will just go along our lives together as a family unit. And in the beginning years, before August came home, it really truly started to really adjust my thinking and all that. Just this understanding and growing that adoption involves 3, it's a triad, and it's a
Yes.
birth family, our birth family, and it's an adoptive parent, and it's an adoptee. And
Right.
we meaning the United States, I think especially, maybe I don't know about global adoption culture because I'm here, this idea of we've centered me, the adoptive parent, right? Like what I need, what my story is. And
Yes.
in the meantime, there's all this brokenness and trauma. So
Mhm.
bringing by the time we got to August, I just had a really
Mm.
healthier understanding of the brokenness and trauma from which adoption is birthed, and
Mm.
there's no way around it. It is the starting point.
Wow.
And this idea that my my child all 3 of my children, the best thing that could have happened to them is to stay in their intact family as a
Mm.
good whole family.
Right.
I'm not the best thing. Plan
Mhm.
B should not have been, that's plan A, and that wasn't an option.
Right.
Multiple reasons for each kid. And
Mhm.
so then they're with me, but there's that severing of a relationship, right?
Mhm.
So that's
Yes.
getting a little deep here, but in meeting August and knowing about him, going into that adoption, making the decision to bring him home, having a different reverence for his birth mother and
Mm.
stepping into it with that as well, as
Yes.
as well as processing and thinking through with
Mhm.
my girls and what this means for them
Yes.
to have a baby brother with Down syndrome and a heart defect and a
Yes.
relationship with a family,
Mhm.
and, because we have a continued relationship with his family,
Mhm.
and having them see, in their little brains and hearts,
Yes.
my appreciation for their brother's birth family, right? That can hopefully
Right.
reflect back on them. So
Right.
that was kind of in a roundabout way, I think, of answering your question, but it
Mhm.
was all the things I was learning and processing through in real time,
Mhm.
making this decision to bring August home, um, and how that affects my girls. It's a big decision
Yeah.
to bring another child into your home, however that child gets there.
Yeah.
It changes everything. You
Mm.
can never go back.
Right.
And for the majority of the people I know, it's great, right? Like, you can't
Right.
imagine life any other way.
Any other way.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So, Heather, my next question has to do with advice. What advice would you give to somebody who has perhaps, like we both heard from the doctor, infertility pieces, and them wanting to, the doctor wanting to say, hey, look, keep all your options open?
Mhm.
What advice would you give to somebody who is hearing that, kind of taking yourself back maybe 20 years
Mm,
to that point? For me, I just encourage you. I encourage, my advice would be, not, don't go alone. Have your partner there
mhm,
with you, have your husband there with you, so that you're hearing these kinds of things, that everybody's hearing the same inflection, because the words can be written down, but the inflection is what carries, right? So much
right.
of the emotion that goes along with that. So that's my personal advice. What would your advice be?
Yes, I love your practical advice. My advice always goes straight to emotion.
Mhm. I love it.
I I would advise people to be so gentle with themselves. Um,
Yes.
the reality is you are going to make you're going to find yourself in situations of making decisions that it's not a right or wrong decision, it's a
Thank
decision, right?
you. Yes.
And and you're gonna have so many emotions and feelings connected to every decision, and to
Right.
just be so gentle and gracious with yourself
Mm.
and forgiving for any mistakes you make in all
Mhm.
the process, and as much love as you can give yourself.
Heather, I'm just soaking that in now. And for me, it's been, our daughter's 26, almost 27. So it's been, 28, 29 years ago that I heard these things. But your words are such a healing balm for me. Our
Mm,
decision was, we're just going to choose the next step and maybe retire early, right?
yeah.
And then somehow I got pregnant with our daughter and was only able to carry one full term,
Mhm.
because then there became this other thing of, you only have one. And
Yeah.
in this community that we lived in was this idea of multiple children. In the church that we went to at the time, there were people who had 10 children.
Yeah.
And so who were we to think that one was going to be sufficient, whatever that was about? And so that space of really being kind to yourself, I love,
Mhm.
love, love how you're sharing that. And there
Yeah.
was only one family that had that many kids. The rest of, most people only had two or three or four.
Right.
But there were some that were
Yeah.
like, this is a great thing. Let's just continue going. And so your words just settle. And I just feel that in my body in a different way,
Mhm.
about being, gentle with yourself in that process.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Sorry, can I say one more thing that I was just
Yes,
thinking as you were sharing
please.
that I would also advise people, and I tell myself this too with the makeup of my family, that your story is, you don't owe it to anybody else.
Thank you.
And when you are in such a wounded state is you're doing. Sometimes I'm a pleaser. I'm a recovering people pleaser. And sometimes there's this need to like make sure that other people feel uncomfortable with the thing that's uncomfortable about me, or make sure people feel
Comfort.
comfortable with
Yes.
the thing that I'm going through that's uncomfortable.
Yes.
And you don't owe that to anybody. No
Mm.
one, no, you owe your story to nobody. So people can be curious
Yes.
and you can
Yes.
come up with a line, like a little script that's polite and kind, but
Yes.
it's not any, nobody is owed your
Mhm.
story.
Yes.
If you want to share it, do,
Yeah.
but you get to have that tender moment. You get to decide.
I was talking with an aide last year who works in a special ed room, and I was teaching choir at the time, elementary choir, and there would be kids who came in from the special ed room to come join us. I loved that. And some of them would come in with, earphones over their ears because
Mhm,
whatever we were doing, it was primarily autistic room. Whatever we were doing would be, considered that was just hard on their being
mhm,
for us to have music going, right? And so quieter was better. But one student, she would particularly hold at the door, and they had a what she called a social story.
mhm.
And the
Yeah,
social story was, we're going to go in for music. Some students really like loud music. I don't have to like loud music, but I'm going into music anyway.
yeah.
And I took that and applied that idea of a social story to so many areas. It was like this whole just door opened up for me. Just
Mhm.
what you were saying about have these social stories
Yeah,
ready ahead of time. Other people can be curious and they can be a little bit intrusive. It can feel
mhm,
that way. And I also am a recovering people pleaser. And so allowing them to feel whatever they are feeling and not trying to make it better, but to give them a space of, for me, a space of truth of where I am, but not asking them to fix it and
mhm.
not asking me to fix it. This is just where the pieces are right now. It doesn't mean they're going to be that same way in 15 minutes or 15 years. This is just where they are now.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
to be okay with that, in that. So, what advice would you give to somebody who is looking to adopt and they're in the same place that you and your husband found yourselves initially with
Mhm.
wanting a healthy child? What advice would you give there?
Yeah, I will go back in time to my young self.
Yes.
I I would encourage you and advise you to go into adoption as a learner first, not
Mhm.
as a potential mother pursuing a child.
Not as a
And
savior. Yeah.
yeah, and I would say that it's a really important, well, and in your learning, you'll recognize, like, hopefully
Mhm.
you'll learn that there's no savior here.
Right.
Um, and adoption is not like this cute, fun thing where you bring home the cute little baby who's a different race than you. Like, this is not what
Right.
this is. It is so complex. And I don't want to scare people away who are interested in adoption, but
Right.
also it's very complex. It's
Yes.
very layered and complicated and
Mhm.
hard. And it's because of that, like I mentioned before, it's because the starting point is a severed relationship, is
Right.
the starting point is trauma and
Mhm.
tragedy. And
Yes.
there is not an adoption that is not where it starts. And
Right.
so having an understanding of what that means,
Mhm.
um, and listening to adult adoptees, I have
Oh,
over the
brilliant.
last 5 or 6 years, like,
Brilliant.
inundated myself with adult adoptees. There's more platform because of social media,
Right.
right? And
Yes.
so, like I said, when we adopted Mason, I didn't know an adopted family, let alone an
Right.
adult, and
Right.
there was such a stigma to talk about adoption for so
Mhm.
many years for people, and now adults are saying they're telling their stories, and I'm so
Yes.
grateful, and some stories I hear, I think, I don't want you sharing that, I don't wanna hear anything you have to say,
Right.
right? And
Right.
others, it's like, "Okay, I can get on board there," but it's important for me
Yes.
to hear it because those are
Yes.
my kids. And
Yeah.
if you're gonna be an adoptive parent, your child is going to be an adoptee, and that
Yes.
means something to them that I'm not, so I will never be able to understand that part of their story. So,
Right.
it's that education piece is just really, really important,
Yes.
and don't let it scare you away, right? Like, doing hard things is important, and
Yes.
life is complex and hard, right? Like, it's both and because I
Yes.
just this week, Sarah, with one of my children, we were having a really heavy moment attached to
Mm.
their adoption and the loss, their loss.
Yes,
And that'll come, it'll just come out of nowhere, right?
exactly.
And I'm holding it with him, we're holding it together, and I said to this
Mhm.
child, I said, "You know, I'm so thankful that you shared that with me, and I will hold that with you. And every day I think about your birth family and your birth mother, and
Mhm.
I mourn the fact that we don't have relationship with that person.
Yeah.
And at the exact same time, I'm so thankful for our family here." And 2
Yes.
things can be true at once.
Yes.
I'm so thankful that we pursued
Mm.
adoption. I'm so thankful that we've landed where we've landed, in that we're gonna move forward as listeners and learners in the space, and being able to figure out how to hold the tension of 2
Mm.
very opposite ideas being
Mm.
true at the same time. Like, I'm so, so thankful. So, do it, but be educated is what I would say.
I really appreciate you talking about how every single adoption begins with loss. My parents took in my three cousins because their parents were killed in a car accident by a drunk driver. And so our story of melding two families together began with tragedy and loss. But as I'm thinking about my earliest memory of growing up in Africa, my parents were working. There was a family that was very, very close to ours. He was a translator, and they had two of their own children, and then had adopted a child. They were Caucasian, are Caucasian. He had adopted a child while they were in while they had been traveling. They had been doing some different things around the world, and because of his translator status, had access into other countries. And so they had adopted a boy from Thailand.
Mhm.
And his began with his mother dying. There had never been, there was no trace of who the father was. And they found him and they took him in the adoption agency or the adoption place there. And so they went into this adoption place in his story. So here we are in Africa, where the majority of people are very, very um, dark in their complexion.
Yeah.
And then, there are a few of us who are Caucasian. And then here he is, a Thai boy. But
Wow.
what made it work so well there was that there were so many other kids from different embassies around the world who we were
Mhm,
all going to school together. So
mhm.
we were just a mixed bag to begin with. And that's one of the things that I've heard people who are in relationships with somebody who has a different ethnic background or cultural background than theirs is that living in places where those cultures or ethnicities are showing up
Yeah.
helps them to feel like that they fit in or
Yeah.
can find a community that eats their kind of food, right? Or that likes their kind of music or whatever that happens to look like. So, this idea of inclusion, yes, is about medical issues. It's also about the people that we open our hearts to, whether it's through adoption or through partnership or collaboration or whatever that happens to look like.
Yeah, yeah. We talk in the adoption space, you hear a lot about having racial or cultural mirrors for your children.
Ooh, I
So I
like
think that
that.
how
Mhm.
important that is, and with my middle daughter, Truly, who is African American and Guatemalan, presented to us as a Hispanic baby, but we learned later that she's African American and Guatemalan,
Right.
um, that it is critical for her to have people in her life who look like her. Critical.
Yes.
And to the point
Yes.
that we will not choose to live in a space where that doesn't exist, and we
Exactly.
will only put her in schools where we know that that is a priority.
Yes.
And it's an intentional effort on our part because
Mhm.
it's critical for her. And
Right.
so it's interesting, this idea of inclusion, because we also are huge on making sure that we have people in our lives who are different from us.
Yes.
And I just think people, I will say this, I will risk saying this, and maybe I'll come back and learn more and not agree with it. But I believe that people in minority groups need to have both groups of inclusion where there's all kinds of different people, and they need to have groups where it is just people like them in the group.
Yes.
I don't need that because I live in a white normative world where the majority is our culture has created a majority for me, where that's not the case for my kids with Down syndrome or my daughter who is Black. And
Right.
so it's, as an inclusion's what we do, right? Like belonging and inclusion, and it's spaces where everyone can belong. And even
Yes.
understanding what that within belonging, how critical it is to have separate spaces. And
Yes.
finding that or learning that those separate spaces, we can create a separate space with the intention of othering, which is harmful, or we
Mm.
can create a separate space with the intention of honoring.
Oh, I like
And right? And so, like, my daughter
yes.
truly right now at her school is creating a Black student union,
Mhm.
and that is a separate space that's important because
Right.
we're honoring who she is and who her friends
Yes.
are,
Yes.
right? Instead of, like, my kids with Down syndrome have to go to a special ed class because it's a separate space to other them,
Right.
if that makes sense, and not all special ed classes
Totally.
are that,
Right.
but there's a big difference in how inclusion looks and plays out, even in the places that you mentioned, right? Like, in when you get a
Yes.
bunch of different kids together,
Mhm.
um, that it's so beneficial and crucial for us to be living alongside and learning with people who are so different than we are. The way they look and think and act and behave in the
Mm.
world, I believe, is critical to our humanity thriving.
Yes.
I think the more we separate and segregate,
Mhm.
it the more broken we are as
Yeah.
human beings, right? That's critical. But then it's also critical for people who find themselves often being marginalized to be to have spaces they can go and just like
Mhm.
exhale, right?
Yes. As you were speaking about this, the one thought that came to mind for me is as we are honoring and having spaces that of people who look like and then areas that have everything all together. I think that for me, being a people pleaser is that I knew how to show up in every single
Mm,
one of those spaces. So take me into an African village, I can absolutely read the room. I can do the thing, right? Because at that moment, because I was raised in an African village, I know exactly what to do and how to do. Part of my journey has been what does it look like to be somebody who has this color skin, who has that understanding of the world,
yeah,
living in a place, right, that people would say things like, I love Lucy, talking about referencing a show. And my response was, who's Lucy to love?
right.
And that was more than once that those kinds of things happened. And so for me, that journey has been I can make people feel comfortable without people pleasing. And then also, am I being authentically myself no matter where I show up?
Mm,
And that has taken me adult work to work on
mm,
to find that commonality of this is who I am. I can have the understanding I can have, but this is who I am across the board. And to be constant with that, I think is one of my current areas of learning.
wow.
Um,
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. That's really that's really something to think about. How like we just how as people we do just categorize others,
yeah,
and we but based on how we look, right? Our understanding of who someone is because of how they look,
yeah,
based like rooted in the culture in which we're brought up in.
right.
So right, so that's just you as a white woman in America is a different journey internally, right?
Yes,
And it will appear externally, but
right.
you can't control how other people
Mm-mm.
perceive you compared to a white woman who did live in America her whole life, right?
No,
Like, it's
exactly.
very interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
absolutely. If you could talk to absolutely anybody who is alive today or not, anyone who speaks your language or not, who would you choose to have that conversation with and why?
Oh my gosh. I would want to today, I would really love to talk to my daughter Truly's birth mom.
Mm,
Because we don't have a picture, we don't have a story, we don't have
mm,
anything. And I would want to know that she's okay. I
yes.
would want to know about her. I would have so many questions about the food she likes and the way she responds to things in the world and her favorite music and how she grew up and where her family's from. And I just would just, oh, I would treasure that conversation. I would just treasure that. And I'd want her to know how incredible Truly is and that she is safe and
Yes.
loved
Yeah.
and that she is thought of. I would want
Right.
her birth mom to know that she is thought of. So
Mm.
I would love a conversation with her.
Oh, I love that. And I can see how that would be so informative on different levels,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Um, because I remember, and Morgan is our child, and so genetically, there are things about her that I go, oh yeah, that's why your toe is like that, right?
Right. Yeah.
But there's also medical things. Oh, I know why your thyroid is doing that. My dad's and mine, and yep, that is heretical as well. But then there's also this point of, I remember more than once just thinking, I wish there was a manual that came along with her,
Right.
to help me understand what the best next step was
Mhm.
as she began to unfold her personality and who she is. And I would think that perhaps that for you, you've wanted that as well.
Oh,
But
yeah.
to be able to have a picture, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah. Or even does she have other siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles? Like who in
Yes.
this world is she genetically attached to that we can find and
Yeah.
hold on to in some way? And
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. I mean, she's 12 years old, so I'm
Right.
hopeful for something in the future, but that
Yes.
would be if I could have lunch with someone today, that's who it would be with.
I love that. The picture behind you is an advertisement for the Gap, and
It
I love
is.
that you guys had this opportunity to do this. How did that come about?
Oh, it was so fun. Um, got my first interaction with the Gap. They hired us in 2019 to do their spring campaign as our family. We do influencer stuff on social media, and
Mhm.
I'm an author and have had a few books come out. And so they had asked us to come just be a part of their spring campaign. And through that amazing, amazing opportunity, we just connected with the right people. Like, we just make friends where we go. And so
Yes, because your
we
heart's open.
our
Yes.
hearts are open, and my amazing, all three of my kids, but especially my daughter with Down syndrome, Macy, she's very uninhibited, and it's
Mhm.
just a real treat and sometimes a little stressful to be in any space with her,
Yes.
because people are oftentimes she's the first person they've ever interacted with Down syndrome, and so there's like wardrobe is sewing things, and she always finds the one person who has a little chip on their shoulder, and she's just like,
Always.
"I love you so much. I love your hair," and like gets to
Yes.
that person, and by the time we're done with our 24 hours together or whatever, people are just changed. It's really incredible.
Yes.
So we
Yes.
made connections there, and then the next year I had my first children's book, which is called Different: A Great Thing to Be, come out. And
Mm,
we did a collaboration with apparel. They did a t-shirt and pajama set based on my book. And then the next year, when my book Everyone Belongs was getting ready to come out, I reached out again to Gap. I thought, I don't know that you work with the same people in this capacity more than once,
right.
but I
Yeah.
have an idea for a back to school campaign. Like, do you have one
Yes.
already? And connected with the right people, created a campaign for back to school called Everyone Belongs,
Beautiful.
and they based it off my children's book, and then they cast so many kids, and it's the most cast members they had with disabilities ever in a Gap campaign. There were my kids with Down syndrome. There was a wheelchair user, a boy with
Beautiful.
follicular implants who
Yes.
signed, a boy with vision impairment, a girl with limb differences. I mean, it was just another boy with limb
Beautiful.
differences. So it was really exciting to know that I got to contribute to such a great
Wow.
campaign, and we had a blast. It was really fun.
I have loved watching and seeing you guys in front of huge Gap windows, huge Gap stores, right? And
Yes.
taking pictures of you guys in front of the pictures. It's
Yes,
so,
so
so very fun.
this picture here was the main ad in Gap store windows across the world. I mean, we thought it was just national, and people were sending us pictures from all over the nation, and then people are showing us they were actually bigger than this. They were just like cutouts of the 3 kids on
Yes.
windows all over the world. It was just incredible. It was
Beautiful.
so fun.
Your family, the
I
one that has
know,
come to you when you
right?
kept your heart open. Yes.
Yes, like how do you even dream that
Mhm.
when I was 27 or 26 years old, thinking,
Right.
how am I ever gonna live without a
Yeah.
child in my womb, right? Like, how do you even
Right.
dream it? So,
Yeah.
it's pretty
Wow.
special.
That really is. Wow. Going back to giving advice, I've saved this one for last in terms of the advice giving. For somebody who is absolutely knows that they want a child who either has medical issues or has that is Down syndrome or has something else, is in a wheelchair, whatever, they know that that's the child that they want to adopt. What advice would you give them?
Um, I th I'm so glad that that's where they're at already, right? They've already been down the journey of the hard yes, I think,
Mhm.
and just to surround yourself in that community. So
Mm,
whatever is unique to your child's disability, your future child's disability, to find that community, because
yeah.
community is gonna be key. Um,
Yes.
Again, that idea of finding people who are like you,
Mhm.
so that you can feel honored and have that relaxed shoulders down posture. And
Yes.
being with the Down syndrome community is just a safe space for our family,
Mhm.
and it's most spaces aren't. So find
Right.
find your
Yeah.
people, and all all you can do is the best you can with who you are and what you have, and that is plenty. Like, you are
Yes.
enough in that regard. So day at a time,
Mhm.
one foot in front of
Yes.
the other, do the best you can with who you are and what you have, and
Mm.
it's gonna be exactly what it's meant to be. It's gonna be great.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah. I think that one of the things that I'm so grateful to see hospitals doing is, City of Hope and Huntington Memorial and Chalk, choosing to have extracurricular things that kids who have similar kinds of experiences can have conversations together in. And I'm just so grateful that they are seeing the benefit of
Mm,
not
mhm.
just the patient in their eyes, but also the community, the family.
Yeah.
You need to have those spaces of connection as well, and how
Yeah.
beautiful that is to watch that expand and grow, and for there to be thoughtful conversation, not just about what do we look like and what are we wearing, but who are we as individuals and what are we
Mhm.
contributing
Mhm.
in the big picture as well
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
Heather, you've written so many different books. What's next? I saw that this beautiful post this last week that you'd gotten a chance to meet with the person who'd reached out to you initially to say, "Hey, write a book."
That's right.
That you had, this kind of thought of, "Hey, there might be some more books coming up." What are you seeing as a space for books on adoption or Down syndrome or any of it?
Yes, so more books are in the future, definitely. I have a 3rd children's book coming out in April of 2025. So
Yay!
it's done and written, it's in the hands of the illustrator, and we're now in the real fun in my opinion, my favorite
Yes,
part of the process is the collaborative.
yes.
Where it's now, I mean, it's done, it's been edited,
Hmm.
the manuscript is in. So it's now
Right.
the collaborative with the illustrator and working with the team and all of that,
Yes.
which is really fun for me. So that is coming, and then some ideas on that next book. There's another book based off that next book, and it will be a children's picture book. When it comes to picture books in the world, or just books in the world where you're seeing people with disabilities or adoption, I remember again when Macy came home, I actually, right after we learned about her, went to Barnes and Noble
Hmm.
and um, looked for books on Down syndrome, and I could find one, and looked for children's books on adoption or Down syndrome, and I only found one adoption book. And this
Incredible.
was 16 years ago,
Yeah.
15 years ago. And I the amount of books that now exist in the world with main characters who have Down syndrome or other disabilities,
Yes.
with about adoption and like kids writing from their own perspective, or stories
Right.
about all different kinds of families, it's really encouraging to see.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot more room on the shelf for
Yeah.
more and more and more. My 2 children's books have been more specific disability,
Hmm.
and my next book is not disability specific, but I gave myself a challenge of writing a book in which all kids can see themselves. That is like
Ooh.
an affirming kind of a book, so
Hmm.
so,
Yes.
for example, avoiding things of like, I love, like, your 10 fingers, 10 toes, or
Right.
like the way that you run, or like, I love how you can somersault, things like that there's
Right.
just kids who can't see themselves in that.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanted a book that is that book you read to your kid at bedtime that you just wanna gush over who they are, and that
Yes.
every kid gets to be a part of it, and not just
Yes.
kids who are non-disabled. So I
I
want
want it to,
more of that.
I want it to be a Caldecott winner. I want it to be a New York Times bestseller. I want all of those special things on the front, right?
Yeah,
That
me
says
too.
the world is noticing because you're doing the work. And that's the other part, then, right?
Mm,
As musicians, we send out the music, but there
yeah,
needs to be an audience. As authors, we do the writing, there needs to be an audience. And
mhm.
so I want there to be a massive audience that responds in just beautiful ways of saying, yes, this resonates with me, with my family, with my potential family, my future
Yes,
family.
yeah, I love that. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, Heather, I have absolutely appreciated every single minute of our conversation. Is there anything that you would like to reiterate? Because we have time for that.
Um, I don't know. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm just grateful for the conversation. I think it's really important to have adoption as a conversation and the
Yes.
hard of it, right? And to have disability as part of the conversation more and more in different places. And
Yes.
um, that idea of like recognizing, I just recognize how much better of a human I am
Mhm.
because I have been very intentional to surround myself with people who are different than I am.
Yes.
And Sarah, between you and me, it's an election year. No
Yeah.
matter which way you lean, I just am worried for us as
Mm.
humans,
Yeah.
um, and all the division that's happening because of a million things in the world, but social media being a big piece of it, and
Right.
all the media and all the ideas in the world that people feel strongly about and disagree on all that,
Right.
and just how healing it can be or how good it can be for our growth to sit across from someone who we don't agree with their stance on a thing
Yeah.
and to say to them, "Tell me more about you." Right? Like, let me
Yes.
see the human in you.
Yes.
And maybe I will always disagree with how you feel, right, on this issue.
Right.
But
Right.
can we connect somehow as humans? And my
Yes.
kids with Down syndrome and my daughter who's a different race than me have
Mhm.
been the catalyst for me to
Yes.
understand that my humanity,
Mm.
our collective humanity is at risk if we don't find ways to connect with people who are different than us. And there's such beauty and goodness when
Mm.
we do.
Yeah. I think the thought that comes to mind for me is the idea of a bouquet.
Mm,
And, there have been different companies that have said, hey, let us send a dozen of the same, whatever color, whatever, right? And for me, my favorite flower bouquets are always ones that have multiple colors, multiple flowers, some things that are going to last just for a day, and some that will dry and last for, a decade, right?
mhm,
But taking that same idea with who my friends are. Now,
mhm,
there may be that we have people who are heart to heart that we can share absolutely with anything with on any time, day or night. And those are super important to me, sacred relationships to have, ones to foster. But this idea of being able to have conversation with truly anybody and to be able to find areas of authenticity that connect in, and to be able to even say that, I agree with you on that.
mm,
To find this verbiage of being able to find ways to say, even though we may be so different on so many different other areas, in this particular area, I also like green beans, whatever
right,
it happens to be, right? But looking for those commonalities, because I think that
right,
that idea of mirroring that you were speaking about earlier is one that can be so helpful to us, Heather, as we are talking with other people, learning to mirror back to them things that we hear that we support, and then to ask questions in ways that are not threatening or don't sound
mm,
threatening, to find verbiage. Again, I think this is about feelings and language,
yes,
and finding ways to be able to communicate and ask questions in a non-threatening way.
yeah,
So beautiful.
yeah. We talk a lot in our home and in the Down syndrome community about assuming competence.
Mm,
And I think that that translates well into these kinds of conversations. Like,
yes.
assume good, right? Like,
Yes.
maybe it's hard to assume the best, but assume good.
Good.
Assume
Yes.
goodness, assume some goodness there,
Yeah.
right? And then let that be the starting point
Mhm.
instead of, like, doubt and bitterness,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
in these conversations.
What foot will we put forward? And we get to choose that.
We get to choose it. We get to
Yes.
choose it. And we get to choose to step back when we're like, "Oh, this was a bad idea," right? Like,
Right.
this is harmful and
Yes.
hurtful. I can
Yes.
choose to step back. There's that too. But for the most part, I just think we all have this desire to be
Mm.
known
Yes.
and to walk in a room and that people are glad we are there. You know,
Right.
like that there's just this
Yes.
deep desire to be known and to be loved
Yes.
and to know and love in return.
Mhm.
And so that that's big. That's a big piece of who I think a big piece of what everybody holds.
And
And
for me, one of the ways of helping people to know that they are wanted or seen is to smile at them. And how silly is that, right? It's
mhm,
such a natural thing, but to be able to smile, to see them and smile and say hi, and
yeah,
watch their countenance change just by you noticing them.
yes.
What a difference that is.
Yeah,
It's
my
beautiful.
daughter, Macy, she's known for saying, "What's your name?" to anybody, around since
I
she was little,
love
to the
it.
point that we've actually put on a T-shirt, "Hi, what's your name?"
Yeah.
And it's so great to watch the whole process unfold of it's like someone's asking you what your name, a stranger is. Oh, she has Down syndrome and her
Yes.
speech is a little bit different.
Yes.
And
Right.
then they're like, "Oh, my name is whatever. What's your name?" Like
Yes.
it's just a really fun thing to watch unfold.
Yes.
It's great.
Oh, it's lovely. Well, thank you so much, Heather. And as your next book comes out, I hope that you will think of us to come
Yeah,
back and have another conversation with. We'd love to share that next chapter with you, literally as well.
thank you,
And
Sarah.
I'm just so grateful for you.
Thank you.
Every single week, we gather together in order to be able to share thoughts and ideas that empower, encourage, that enlighten your path, that help you move to the next place. I am so grateful for Heather finding the time, making the time for us to have this conversation because it truly is a foundational piece about who we are as individuals. And as you go this week, I just trust that you will have an incredible, amazing week, that you'll be pressed down, shaken together, filled with goodness, and that you will keep your options open to the possibility of optimal. I will see you next time.